We good?
Yep.
This is Brandon Hill, and this is welding class. First, I'd like to thank my wife for helping me record this. This is my office, home of my mechanical bull business. So I've been doing that for almost 10 years, and I do repairs and rebuilds of mechanical bulls. Today we're going to talk about welding. And welding is the fusion of metals. So when you take two different types of metal, there's the fusion of them. They can heat them up and press them together. That's a method of fusion. That's the oldest method. That's kind of the way that sedimentary rocks are created. They're just forced together. We're going to talk about some safety equipment and mainly 4 different types of welding. First, we'll go over the safety equipment. This is a shade 5. It's used for oxyacetylene, and you're required to have a shade 5 for that type of welding. This is an older welding helmet that I have had forever, cheap one, but you want it on a minimum of shade 10 to be able to weld any of these types of welding that we're going to talk about. Of course, a striker. That's how we start our oxyacetylene welding, and a grinder. Whenever you start a grinder, you want to be sure to stand away and point it away, because when they create these carbide bits, the last part of the process is bake. They bake them, and if for whatever reason it doesn't bake right, the first time you put it on there and start it, if it's not baked or it's not baked to the right temperature to cure, it will explode. And it doesn't happen very often, but it does happen. First type of welding we're going to talk about is the oxyacetylene. Okay. In oxyacetylene, there's a bottle of oxygen, right? And a bottle of acetylene. The bottle of acetylene is smaller. You use less of it than you do the oxygen. And on both of these, there's 2 gauges on top of the bottle. One measures the amount of oxygen or acetylene that's in the tank, and that's the one closer to the tank. The one that's further away from the tank measures the amount of oxygen or acetylene in the hose. Oxygen, you go ahead and open it up quite a ways. Acetylene, you want to be careful with the regulators. They're set up to not ever put out more than 15 psi, pounds per square inch. You don't ever, never, ever put more than 15 pounds per square inch in an acetylene bottle. It becomes unstable. It'll blow up. It will blow the roof off your house. When they fill a bottle of acetylene, there's 3 things that go into a bottle of acetylene. The first one used to be asbestos. They changed that, and now it's plastic, cement. The second thing they put in the bottle is acetone. fingernail polish, right? The third thing is they put in the acetylene. And the acetylene, when mixed with acetone, settles. It mixes. And you can have it to over 15 pounds per square inch because it makes it happy, right? And so you can do that. It takes 72 hours minimum to fill a bottle of acetylene, because they have to give it time to mesh in the plastic cement and with the acetone. If it doesn't settle, it'll blow up. They have to trickle charge it like in a battery, like trickle charging a battery. You have to put it in there always at less than 15 pounds per square inch. And then it will settle. If you ever have to lay the bottle down, which you do sometimes to move them, it's not recommended, but if you have to move it and lay it down, that's okay. But when you stand it back up, you need to wait 20 minutes because it can become unstable just by laying down. The oxygen, all these oxygen tanks are the same. It's just compressed in there. There's it's just a sealed bottle. The oxygen's really pretty simple. So you use this for cutting, a cutting torch, or you can use it. A rosebud you can put on the end of it. A rosebud's a method of letting it's like a forge. You can really heat up a lot of metal. You can't take, it takes, when you're letting the oxygen and the acetylene out, you can't ever use more than 1/3 of this bottle at one time. If you do, your tank will show that it's empty. It's not empty. It takes time for that acetylene to separate from the acetone and the plastic cement. It takes time to separate and become available. And so it will say, the tank will say that it's empty, but it's not empty. So you'll take that bottle thinking that it's empty over to Norco and go to drop it off and buy a new one. And you know what they do? Cha-ching. It's not empty. Still got a bunch in it. They weigh it, and that's the way you know if it's truly empty or not, is knowing how much is actually in there is by weight. So that's the basics on oxygen and acetylene. There's been accidents, in Utah there was during a substitute teacher, the kids were messing around, filled a garbage bag, a black garbage bag full of acetylene, and lit it, and when it blew up, it blew all the windows out of the building and then sucked all the glass back in, all the broken glass. Acetylene is a zero tolerance horseplay mixture. It's actually H2C2 is what acetylene is. And if anybody had any questions about acetylene, we could go over that right now. They use it for fillers. They used it for a long time more with body work than they do now. They used to melt lead with it and fill the body in vehicles with it. They don't do that anymore. So that's the first type of welding we talk about. There's cutting torch, there's filling, there's brazing. Those are the most common types of oxyacetylene. The next type is soldering. Soldering is a method of melting. They call it solder. It has a low melting temperature, and you solder, and it's a common practice done by plumbers to seal up copper pipe in your house. They don't do it anymore, or they don't do it as much anymore. There's better practices, but it's still real common to solder and have it. They call it a soldering iron and solder, and when you touch it, it will melt and fuse into the connection of pipe. I don't have the equipment here to show any of that, but soldering is the practice of fusing metal that has low melting temperatures. You can't arc or shield weld copper. It doesn't work. It just melts and blows out, just like lead does. Anyway, there's not a whole lot there. That will be our first project, is soldering copper pipe and then testing it with water to make sure it seals up. The next type we're going to talk about is arc welding. There's two types, and MIG. Okay. Arc welding is the fusion of metal. This one is stick metal arc welding. Could have done that the other way. This one is metal inert gas. Okay? Metal inert gas. First, we're going to talk about arc welding. Arc welding's common outdoors. You see welder generators. Most of those are just stick welders. And the stick welder, you've got a I'm not an artist here, but you got just a butt weld here, and you've got your arc. This is be my stinger, and you're going to go in there and you're going to fill that gap. And with stick welding, it has on the outside of the stick, it has flux. And flux is a cleanser. It cleans the weld, it protects the weld, and it shields the weld from oxygen while you're welding. So while you're going down through there just like that, there is a flume of gas that is melted and erupting in your path as you go. And that's what stick welding, that's how it is. And you'll have common types of the welding rod. They call it welding rod, and it goes in your stinger, and you have a ground and you weld. So you'll have 7018 is a common one, 6010 is a common one, 6013 is a real common one. This first two numbers, that is your tensile strength. That's your tensile strength of that rod, a welding rod. When welded properly, at the right speed, with the right bolts and amps, you'll get 70,000 pounds of tensile strength out of that. This second number, So this is 60,000 pounds of tensile strength, right? This second number is the position of welding. There can be other things in there, but and they use this with they use this a lot with underwater welding. You have to know your position. So overhead, vertical, horizontal, they have different ones. And that's what that second number represents. And we could go on and talk about different vertical, horizontal, and overhead welds that and speed. You know, it just takes practice. Welding is a function of practice over time. Nobody's good at it right away. So that answers the arc welding part of today's class. MIG, you remember what we called it? Was metal inert gas. And rather than having all the flux on your welding rod, this form of fusion welding, in your stinger, you have, in your welder, you have a coil full of wire, and it feeds out of your stinger. Your wire continuously feeds out. And so does your gas. You'll have a gas bottle here. Okay. And you want this gas to be 15 to 25 pounds per square inch. And that will keep your weld sufficiently covered in gas so that you don't have the holes and problems in your weld. There will be no strength if you can't shield the oxygen from your weld. So your welding wire and your gas are continuously coming through here all day. And where you're welding, just like with your stick and SMAW, it puts out a flume of gas right around your weld to keep the oxygen out. Questions about, if you weld this outside, the wind will blow your gas away. So it doesn't work very well. If there's any wind at all, the slightest breeze, it won't work. Questions about MIG welding? It's usually in a shop, MIG welding, and that's what I do for a living, MIG weld. So for MIG or stick, you need a shade 10 welding helmet. For oxygen acetylene, you need a shade 5. And you remember both cutting wheels and grinding wheels on bench grinders and cutoff angle grinders. Before you ever turn them on for the first time, you want to stand back because they bake these and they blow up. Why do we use a striker instead of matches? So we're not, it's faster, we're not in the way. There's some colors. We're all going to go out in the shop in a little bit, and I'm going to show you what some colors are. Right? What is the blue in the shop represent. Same thing it does on the freeway. Blue is information, right? What's red? Red represents danger or safety. Okay? There's orange. Orange represents, trying to remember what orange represents. Blue, red, orange. Green. It's oxy. I'm gonna have to remember though. Anyway, I'll remember when we get out in the shop all of them. There's those are the main. Those are two of the main ones. Thanks again to my wife for helping me record this. We're going to go over more questions, projects, and finishing this out. Bring forward all your questions. If I'm talking about something you have a question about right then, raise your hand. If it's off subject but it's still about welding, wait till I'm done and we'll go over those right now.